other side of writing a book. What sort of book it is. It can be a business book, it can be a memoir, it can be anything. It can be a children's book. The process of writing will change your life. Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm your host Tony Lontas and this is the Artist and Author Show. See, again, my tongue's getting tired. It's the beginning of the new year. I've had a bit of a break and this is the second show back. But today we have another amazing author to talk to you about. But before we do that, don't forget, if you're listening to this live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, you will find information about the book we talk about and the amazing author who wrote the book in all the show notes that accompany this interview. Don't forget, you can see us live on Tony TV, on all LG, Samsung and Roku smart TVs across the planet. And very soon we'll start live streaming into the Everyday Women's Network, our own TV network for women. Now, if you are familiar with our shows, you know that each and every week we do a welcome to country as an important acknowledgement of the beautiful Indigenous peoples of our country. So I want to respectfully acknowledge the people of the Yugambeh language region on the Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and all Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal people listening to the show today. Now, we're going to be talking to the author of Under the Boab Tree, Franceska Jordan. But before I interview this gorgeous woman, here's what you need to know about Franceska. Now, Franceska worked in Australia and has worked internationally, and she is internationally renowned for her work in welfare, health, and the academic fields, as well as being a social worker, a counsellor, an educator, planner, advocate, and researcher. Now, her book, Under the Boab Tree, is a stirring memoir that traverses Africa and Australia and follows the journey of the Speer Jordan family, of which Franceska is one, who fled the persecution and poverty from Lithuania to South Africa, and then the political the political issues of South Africa. This changed Franceska and her mother Isabella forever. The tale is about the souls of these women connecting to the people they meet, like the Princess Yasmin Aga Khan, Rita Hayworth's daughter, and the richness of their heart. The mother and daughter's spiritual and political humanitarian awakening in this chronicle gives them power and purpose in finding truth and justice for others and for themselves. This story tells how the women came into a place of acceptance and stillness, and the ultimate savior, being love, was prevalent in their life. A love that unravels and transcends exploitation and fear. Born in South Africa, Franceska tells her mother Isabella Jordan's journey into activism in standing up for human rights. And as the growing apartheid stranglehold tore through the country in the 50s and beyond, Isabella joined the Workers' Trades Union movement, which was much to her husband's opposition. The domestic violence that followed in their home kept pace with the growing hatred in and around the country of South Africa. Welcome to the show, Franceska.
Thank you, Tony. Gosh, it's quite a long story, isn't it?
It is. And I thought we'd start the show with one of your favorite motivational quotes because it links to the book so nicely. And that is, knowledge is a Baobab tree. No one person can embrace it all alone. And it's a proverb from southeastern Ghana in West Africa. What does this quote mean to you, Franceska?
Well, it's about everything we do is co-created. I love what Caroline Myss says. And it's also about to write a book, you need a village, as you do to raise a child.
Yes.
And knowledge is in a community. So it's not just one person who has all the knowledge. It's a number of people. It's a community, it's a family, it's a community, it's a nation. And the Baobab tree, there's one in South Africa that's 6,000 years old, still standing.
Wow.
Yes. And some of them are so enormous, there's no way you could ever get your arms around one tree.
Oh my
Even
goodness.
half of the tree. Yeah, so that's where, and it's, you know, so in my book, for every chapter, there's an African proverb that goes with what that chapter contains.
Amazing.
So that particular chapter is how I feel I actually became the Boab tree. You know, yeah, I used to escape the violence in the home by climbing a tree.
Yes.
And in the garden, and one of the trees in that area was a baobab.
Wow. They're ancient, aren't they?
Very
Imagine
ancient.
if they could talk.
Yeah, very ancient. And their genetic structure, which I've talked about in the book, I've did a lot of research on the baobab tree and other trees. Every chapter has some other tree in it as well. But the character in the tree character is called Boa. And he is the wisdom reflective voice. And they've done the genetic, it's enormous. It's 600 or something, or even more genetic compounds in a baobab, more than in the human body. Yes.
Wow. And so you got all this information when you were researching the book.
Yes.
There's something very special about understanding the world that we live in. And I'm so glad that you did that research and incorporated it in your book. And in talking about the book, they're tough topics to talk about, Franceska. So domestic violence, war, fleeing countries, political unrest, they're all difficult. How difficult was it to write from that perspective? Because I found it difficult, though cathartic, and I find it healing. And I've also, as you know, I'm really passionate about telling people's stories because I think that's an important part of their healing. But more importantly, I think it's incredibly important for the healing of humanity to heal and tell stories. Yeah?
I agree. And you know what was so important for me to come through, because I really did grapple with being so vulnerable. I had the most brilliant editor in New York, Virginia Lloyd, who worked with me nearly 2 years, actually.
Yeah.
And she said I was very courageous to be so vulnerable. And for me, it was really important to move through the shame of telling my story.
Yeah.
You know, and I have had opposition in different
Yes.
areas to writing and publishing this, but I persevered because, you know, in the front of the book, I say, as many members as there are in a family, there will be different versions of that story. And this is mine.
Yes.
This is my version. other people might have theirs, and then they can go and write their book.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, as you know, and you and I have spoken about this before, so there was opposition to me writing my memoir, of course.
Yeah.
And it is important to remember that our perspectives and memories are our own, and we should never invalidate someone else's perspectives and memories. And it's important to acknowledge it. And I too wrote in the start of the book that these were my memories and my perspectives, just as you did, just as you wrote in the start of your book. But it's still important, not just for your healing, but healing and knowledge and understanding for those people that read such a courageously written book. Franceska, the hope and love that you talk about across your journey, how important was it to have hope across those times?
Essential. I don't believe I would have survived otherwise. Tony, if I didn't have nature, because I call Boab my nature mother and father, particularly father. If I didn't have that sustenance, that embracing from the tree which was my sanctuary, and there's another person who's really important, was my African nanny in South Africa called Regina. Because once someone said to me, there must actually, even my Jungian therapist said, because I had a lot to deal with when I was writing this book. A lot of memories came out. A lot of the trauma resurfaced. And so I worked with a therapist while writing my book and did other.
Well done.
And there are other. There was another technique I used, which is called tremoring. I don't know if you've heard of it, where you can release. Animals do it naturally, particularly dogs.
Oh, do
they? Where the body shakes. And when I started writing, I was doing my master's in writing your first draft. And we did 1,000 words a day at least. And I would then tremor. I would go and lie on the carpet and then do the tremoring to release that trauma out of the memory cells of my body. But Regina gave me love. She was my African nanny because my mother was very busy working. She tried to protect me from my father's beatings. And she was the one person who gave me love. Now, when you have a traumatic journey and have history in a family, to survive that and to have hope, you only need one person who shows you love, Tony.
Absolutely.
You just need one person in your life.
That's enough.
And then from that, you can survive. And you can come to a place of hope.
Amazing.
Another quote that I have in my book is that even in the saddest of times and places, I was able to find joy. And that's my mainstay even now in life.
It's part of resilience too, isn't it?
Yes.
I've been rereading and tapping into some of Brené's work around resiliency. And for people who are able to still find and experience joy despite the trauma that they may be in, they have higher levels of resilience. And by resilience, I just mean your ability to cope with life and what life throws at you. And you certainly had a lot to deal with over the course of your life.
The other thing that I've often said, and it's in the book, is I see myself as that round bottom dolly. You can, you can side swipe us down. We just go ping and we just come back up. And
that's a lovely description.
And keep bouncing on. Just that's how I've seen myself and my mother. Both of us are these round bottom dollies.
Yes. In Under the Boab Tree, you talk extensively about your mother, obviously,
Yes.
but she flees South Africa to live in exile. And
Yes.
where did you go?
All right. So we left. She was going to be imprisoned because of her
Yes.
trade union work and anti-apartheid work.
Yes.
So we took the train. So there was a way to find out, a bit of an underground way of finding out who was going to have that knock on their door to be taken in for questioning. And
because they may not have let her out
no
at that time,
no,
would they?
no.
That she would have
And
been arrested.
No, she could have, like, there is Ruth First, who I talk about in my book, a compatriot of my mother's. She was imprisoned and in solitary confinement for a long time.
Yeah.
And another trade unionist I interviewed, he was under I think it was the 100-day or longer, where he without any trial, without legal representation, they just kept you for that time, and they could do anything, any sort of torture. And yes, so we got tickets to leave by train, leave Johannesburg, go to Bulawayo, which is in Zimbabwe, which at that time was Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia.
And you were safe there? Franceska?
Yes, we were safe, although even that country had issues, but it didn't have apartheid.
Okay.
So we were safe there because the South African government had no jurisdiction, and it was a British protectorate at the time.
Okay.
Which was different to South Africa.
Yeah. So at that time, you and your mother fled. When did you make it to Australia, and what were some of the thoughts that got you here?
All right. So we left South Africa in 1977 after the Soweto riots.
Okay.
So my ex-husband and I decided the land is soaked in blood. Not so different to Australia.
Yeah.
Actually, very similar. With the indigenous peoples and not having their rights and the brutality they've suffered. So we just didn't want our children growing up in an apartheid.
Yeah.
At that stage, I only had one son, and we went to New Zealand because my ex-husband's family live in New Zealand.
We went to
Auckland.
Yeah.
Yeah. Went to Auckland in New Zealand, and then that's where my eldest son went to school. Actually went to the Jewish day school then. Yeah. And then I became pregnant. So there's 6 years between the two boys. And then I became pregnant with my second son. And when he was 3 months old, we moved from Auckland to Sydney in Australia. But I have to say, in my book, there's a really interesting part in one chapter. When my eldest son, I had to flee Angola because the Cubans invaded. I was 8 months pregnant, and I left the country with money in my pocket that I changed, I changed into Rhodesian pounds at the time on the black market because all the banks were closed, no bank transfer. A belly, 8 months pregnant. I had to get special medical certificate before the airlines would take me. And I flew into Harare in Zimbabwe, which used to be Salisbury. Yes. And I had my son. And then when he was 10 days old, so I had him in transit. And when he was 10 days old, I flew to Durban in South Africa.
Gosh.
It's all in the book. It's all in the book, Tony.
Even that's just bravery. I'm thinking about the things that mothers do in the late stages of pregnancy, and it's all brave in my book, having had one of those stories myself. Franceska.
And arriving in South Africa and not knowing a soul.
Oh, I cannot imagine.
Baby.
And those first babies are tricky.
Yes, yes.
Because you've really got no idea what's going. Even the best prepared of mothers, it's still your first child, and you still you're not sure quite what to do at times, and if you don't have support to talk to, it makes it really, it can be quite a struggle. I want to just take the time during this interview to congratulate you on your Australian medal, the AM. Can you tell the audience why you have this prestigious award and what is it in recognition of?
Okay. All right. So even as a child, I always looked after the elderly in our street. I'd do their shopping, or I'd carry their shopping, or I'd visit them. And then when I came to Brisbane, I went to work at the Prince Charles Hospital, and I was the social worker for 232-bed nursing home, the sole social worker for that. Gosh. And then I also worked in outpatients with a neurologist to assess people, to look at their conditions. And we were seeing a lot of people with dementia, and Alzheimer's is one of the dementias.
Yes.
Dementia is the umbrella term for about 20.
And there's lots underneath that, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. And I just felt so inadequate as a social worker because there was nothing in the community for these families. So I started there is a chapter in my book on my work with the Alzheimer's. So I started the association with a few others, set up the Alzheimer's Association in Queensland, Australia, and internationally. And that's what I got my medal for, and working in mental health and disability. So that's
well
what I got.
Done. Well done.
I'm a pioneer both in Australia and internationally. There were only 3 of us from Australia who set up the international body.
Well done.
From around the world as well.
Well done, Franceska. In talking about your book, I just want to go back to domestic violence and people with mental health issues, because it's an incredibly important topic to talk about. And I'm curious about your wisdom and what you'd like to say about women that might be listening, that may be in a domestic violence situation. What is your message for those women that might be listening, Franceska?
My message is it's really essential not to remain silent, but to find a way to do that doesn't endanger the person, the woman. Yeah. So find if they find a friend that they trusted can talk to, that's not really part of the couple's knowledge. Find someone.
Correct. It has to be outside the couple group, doesn't it? Absolutely.
And they're all right. We're still not doing enough and don't have enough services, but there are services that people can ring. And that's a really important first step, because those services can help you, if you decide you want to leave, can help you to do that safely.
Yes, and it is about making sure that they can leave safely. And for some women, and I've had that conversation recently, Franceska, where the women didn't become aware that they were in a domestic violence situation until it was like it had been almost decades or longer. And they were talking about listening to a show or a program or a commentary suddenly realizing that the behaviors that they were experiencing in their everyday lives were in fact domestic violence. And so you, like I, am very passionate about making sure that women understand what is considered normal and acceptable behavior and what is not. And so, Franceska, from your wealth of experience, can you give us some of those key behavioural points for women who might be listening, and men too? Because
Yep.
sometimes
Men,
men
there
don't
are.
realise.
I've dealt with men who've been in domestic violence situations.
Yes.
So it's really important for people to Google coercive control, to Google narcissism, because if the woman is hesitant to say what she spends money on,
that's coercive control.
That is coercive control. Who her friends are. If she's questioned about how long she's been away, talking to her friends, or
prevented from
seeing her
seeing
friends or certain members of the family, because that's a way to isolate the person. If there's excessive verbal abuse,
yes,
psychological abuse, in gaslighting, people need to look up what gaslighting is, where you told you have the mental illness because
you're putting boundaries
with your behavior, or you're putting boundaries in. Yep. So there's so many big and little alarm bells.
And sometimes, Franceska, it starts with small little things that you may not be aware of, and then it starts to escalate, or it might be quickly escalated by whatever's happening in the family environment. So sometimes I've heard women speak of a death in a family that the male partner just had an inability to cope with, and that kick-started domestic violence because they couldn't cope with the grief or didn't know how to cope with the grief. So the important thing is, and you can vouch for this as well, but there is help out there, and it's important that you take a deep breath, because it takes courage just to talk to someone. And the person that you speak to needs to be a safe person. So if there's no friends that you think you can trust, then a professional person.
Absolutely.
And someone,
I think you need both, Tony.
Yes, I agree.
You need a friend and a professional person.
Yes.
Because, if it's, say, the man, if he's lost his job or having difficulties at work, either he's drinking or his stress levels are really high, then he comes home and takes it out on the wife and the children. So we can't explain that away and just say that the person's stressed, even if it's the woman or the man. You have to look at the behavior and say,
don't you, Franceska? You need a circuit, in that instance, it's not going to get better. Once it's happened, you need something to intervene, i.e. a circuit breaker in that situation. And that's incredibly important, because people can be rehabilitated. People can learn how to deal with their stress and their anger in better ways. There are solutions out there, but you want to protect yourself and your children in the first instance, because the children grow up, and Franceska, I'm going to ask you to talk about a child as being a child of domestic violence, what it does to a child. The children might not be being hurt, only the mother may be being hurt, but that still impacts the children for their life, doesn't it?
Yep, it does. Look, the research shows now through the brain imaging, research shows even if the child hasn't been hit, witnessing a mother being hit or a father being hit
or
does
abused.
The same damage in the brain. It does the same damage in the brain as if, and I know because I still suffer from that.
Yes,
Tony.
And you've done a lot of, and that's the other thing that we need to say is, we speak from a relatively healed perspective. So when you listen to Franceska and I, who've both been in domestic violence and witnessed domestic violence, we come from a relatively healed perspective. But that's not to say that there's moments in time where we aren't triggered. You might watch something on TV. You might hear the tone in a male voice. You might hear a conversation and your body reacts, just as some of the experts talk about your body keeping score. It does. Yeah, and you do learn how to deal with those things. But gosh, if you can prevent the trauma in the child in the first place,
absolutely,
you're circumventing a whole lifetime of trouble, aren't you?
Really, really. You know, Tony, because there was in the first chapter of my book, it's quite startling because of a gun incident.
Mm-hmm.
I can't watch if a gun goes off in a movie or there's.
I jump. Loud noises still make me jump. Yes.
Yeah. If a car backfires on the street, I start shaking. And I've done enormous amount of work. You know, I'm a therapist.
Agreed.
And I understand what's happening, that the trauma has remained in the memory cells in my body. And I've worked with epigenetics, and I've worked with quantum healing and quantum science. It's just so ingrained. I've done EMDR to release the trauma out. I've done so much work.
And it all helps.
It all helps. It definitely helps. But we do. One time I had somebody banging on my front door at night. I didn't open it. But in my chapter, there is an instant. In my book, there's part of it, the chapter where my father was banging on the door to get in when we left him. And he kept finding us.
Yeah.
And that just triggered. And then when I spoke with my sister about it, we realized why I'd been so triggered.
Yes.
Because of that childhood incident.
Yes. And
so
and
we can heal. We can heal, but we also need to be gentle and understanding of ourselves. Like, you know, when I do that, it's actually my body releasing the trauma when I shake like that.
Yes.
And so I don't berate myself because I still have these reactions.
Yeah, that's key, isn't it?
I understand. I'm not ashamed that I feel this way.
I actually have to thank my brain and say thank you.
And your body.
For protecting me and for reminding me that there's still some trauma there. I'm really grateful to have this body and try and be really, I was not good at talking to myself in a way that was helpful. And I know you would have experienced this too. We chide and berate ourselves for, oh my goodness, how silly are you for reacting that way? Well, no. I'm thankful that I've been given a body that has a human response, and I'm acknowledging that there's still some human responses there, and I'm going to go for a walk now, or I'm going to sit in meditation for 5 minutes, or I'm going to have a drink, or whatever it is that helps you get through that moment. The healing helps you get through that moment, whereas previously I would have been in a full-blown panic attack. That's the difference that healing makes.
I agree. And one technique I use that it's really helpful, it's the deep breathing. So you breathe in for the count of 4, breathe out for the count of 8, because that works on the parasympathetic nervous system.
It's powerful, isn't it? That's my favorite.
From the base of the skull, right down into the bell, right down through the spine, all that whole nervous system. It really works. It really helps.
Absolutely. I am one of the key things that I have said and say often is the power of the breath into taking you from traumatized monkey mind into something that you can manage. It doesn't stop the trauma or the trigger. It just helps you manage in a way that is helpful and helpful for releasing, because each time I do that, it reminds me how far I've come, how much healing I've done, and that I have the control to manage those symptoms. But I think that your body reacting in a way that you don't want it to makes you feel a lack of control, and breath work gives you that control back. And I'm hesitant to use the word control, but it helps you manage.
You manage.
It's manage
so
is a
instead
better
of
word.
going into a full-blown panic attack, as you said, you can manage so instead of it being a reaction, it becomes more of a response. Where you're managing what's happening, and then you can just, get on with your day and get on with what you need to do. But by taking that time out first up, you really being very kind to your parasympathetic nervous system. And
you have to be kind to it, because trauma impacts that particular part of your nervous system so much. And so, again, you need to be kind to yourself, your brain, and your body. If you've been through any sort of trauma, and there's no scale of people's trauma being worse than other people's trauma. It's all just trauma.
It's not a competition.
It's not a competition. It's not
about comparison. It's about acknowledging for each, which I do, because sometimes people have said to me, "You've had such your life has been so much worse than the person sitting in front of me." I said, "That's not right. Issue. That's not what's important here. What's important here is that this is your experience and your life, and it needs full attention and understanding.
You need to have full attention to your life. Yes.
And response.
Yes, definitely. Going back to the book, Franceska, it is a powerful and thought-provoking read. 2 final questions. Number 1, what do you want people to take away from the book? And then where can they get the book and connect with you?
All right. So what I'd like people to take away, and many people have said that they found it inspiring, and it's given them hope.
Yes.
And
hope is the big thing, isn't it?
It is hope and inspiring, and that we can survive trauma and we can survive adversity.
Absolutely.
And we can have a very fulfilling and wonderful life.
Exactly. You're a wonderful example of what that looks like. Franceska, what's the best way for people to get the book?
All right. In Australia, the best way is to go onto my website, which is www.franceskajordan.com.au. Now, they have to spell Franceska properly.
With it. That's right. It's got a C-E-S and a K-A.
Yeah. F-R-A-N-C-E-S-K-A, and then Jordan, J-O-R-D-A-N. And internationally, people can get it on Amazon, Bookatopia,
all over the place.
All of those major.
And we will also put those links and connections with this interview as well, so you can grab a copy of your book. How can people connect with you, Franceska?
Well, through my website. They can just go onto my website and they can send me emails. I answer every email. I've answered every review people have done, and I must have at least 50 by now.
Yes.
So whoever writes to me, I will always answer them.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Franceska, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Under the Boab Tree is the book, and you can get it now wherever you get your books. And I encourage you to, if you want to read a provoking, inspirational story based on real life, then this is the book for you. Under the Boab Tree by Franceska Jordan. Get it now. Franceska, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I look forward to our continued interaction and conversations in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. I love the work you do and how you give authors a platform for them to talk about their work. I'm just so grateful.
I'm really privileged that I get to talk to some of the best authors across the planet, and Franceska is definitely one of those. And that, my friends, is your lot for this week. We will be back again shortly with another episode of The Author Show. I'm your host, Tony Lontis. Bye for now. It's not about the book. It's about the person you become on the other side of writing a book. What sort of book it is. It can be a business book, it can be a memoir, it can be anything. It can be a children's book. The process of writing will change your life.